This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Last week, City Council passed a $6.8 billion budget. This is what determines how the city spends money this year. The 15-to-1 approval means the elimination of a small business tax break and the creation of new housing. I'm here with CityCast Philly political contributor Lauren Vitas to cover the winners and losers in this budget. It's Wednesday, June 18th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and we're talking politics. It seems like Mayor Sherrell Parker basically got everything she wanted from City Council in this $6.8 billion budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Mayor Parker had a very successful budget season. Her major initiative this cycle was the Home Initiative. So that stands for Housing Opportunities Made Easy. And as part of that plan, the mayor proposed $800 million in borrowing to fund various housing programs. So I would say this year's budget process was on time, on schedule. There were some late night negotiations, but the mayor got pretty much everything she wanted. There were really 2 points, I would say, of contention in this year's budget cycle. Number one was around taxes, which is always a very contentious topic in the city of Philadelphia. Now, for those of you who might not be as big a nerd as I am and appreciate just how weird and out of line Philadelphia's tax structure is, Philadelphia, compared with most of our peer cities, does taxes very differently. So most big cities rely on property taxes to get most of their revenue and funding. But the city of Philadelphia relies very heavily on the wage tax, which is paid by residents and non-residents who work in the city of Philadelphia, as well as we call it BIRT, the Business Income and Receipts Tax, which is essentially taxes paid by businesses. Now, the reason this can be challenging and problematic for Philadelphia is because unlike property, people and businesses can move, and they can choose not to move to Philadelphia and not to open here. So for years, there's been this big push to get the city less reliant on these types of taxes, and part of that is trying to lower these tax rates, which is something the mayor proposed this year. Now, the tax cut proposal was controversial for some interesting reasons. Some members of council didn't want any tax cuts whatsoever. They're saying with everything happening at the federal level, it's too
money's tight, right?
Yeah, why are we giving away money to especially to businesses? Why are we lowering taxes when we don't know what's going to happen with federal funding right now?
That criticism came from council members Kendra Brooks and Nick O'Rourke, who represent the Working Families Party.
Yeah, so the what I'll call the more progressive sort of wing of city council was saying we should absolutely not be cutting taxes right now. We should be keeping every dollar we're taking in and reinvesting it in city services because people are struggling. So we should be upping city services, not cutting taxes. But then on the other hand, you had some members of council who said, look, we're not doing this fast enough. Philadelphia is not competitive at attracting jobs and businesses. We have to become more competitive. And so, yeah, we might cut taxes short term and it might impact revenue, but this is about long-term growth and making the city more economically competitive. So we should be ramping up these tax cuts much faster. And so in the end, Mayor Parker got essentially what she wanted, which were some modest tax cuts this year, very small, slight lowering of the wage and business taxes. And then in the what people refer to as the out years, so further down the line, these tax cuts get more aggressive. And so I think what she said was look, we're going to lower taxes a little bit this year to show we're moving in the right direction. But by passing these tax cuts in the out year, then I'm showing that my commitment to making Philadelphia more economically competitive. And I think there's a lot of confusion when people hear that council cut taxes in 2033. And that's something that they do every year. They'll change the law and they change the law in far on in the future. But the reality is these tax cuts are good for this year, and they look at the tax code every single year. So these things aren't set in stone.
And these percentages are small, right?
Yeah, they're minute. Most people, you might be able to buy a couple of extra rounds at the bar once with the tax cuts that you're getting. So these are not going to be life-changing for anybody. They are minute, and they're relatively modest. I say again for this year, with the hope that we'll continue to be able to do this down the line.
Okay, so tell me how small business owners are weighing in on these tax cuts.
Yeah, so small business owners are really in a tough spot right now because of a court case that actually kind of upended one of the city's biggest and most effective programs at trying to help small businesses. So the city of Philadelphia years ago passed an exemption to the business tax that said the first $100,000 of income that you get, you don't have to pay taxes on that. And this was really designed to help small businesses, and it did. It exempted a lot of people. And then some out-of-state company that has to pay the tax, some big company said, you know what, this isn't fair. This violates what's called the uniformity clause, and this exemption is illegal. And court rulings have sort of suggested that, yeah, maybe the city of Philadelphia can't do this. So city council and the mayor got rid of this small business tax exemption because they felt that it was getting challenged in court and they were going to lose. And so to try to mitigate some of this, Mayor Parker set aside money in the budget for grants and for other programs designed to kind of alleviate this tax burden on small businesses. So in a way, it's a mixed bag for them, because on one hand, yeah, they see small reductions in the business tax, but on the other hand, they lost this important exemption that basically exempted them from paying anything at all.
Okay, let's talk about what we're going to be spending money on in this budget and what we're not going to be spending money on. There was additional money for law enforcement in the budget, like a new $67 million forensic lab in West Philly. And the budget funds an expansion of the mayor's wellness court, which is intended to get treatment instead of jail time for people suffering from drug addiction in Kensington. What does Parker's spending on criminal justice tell us about the mayor?
So I think what it tells us is that even though housing has kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the room this particular budget cycle, the mayor's priority still is number one, public safety. And I think her spending priority sort of recognizes, we're sort of moving in the phase 2 of what's happening in Kensington, where, last year it was all about the crackdowns and trying to improve quality of life. And now this year it feels like we're making much more significant investment into the folks who are directly impacted by the opioid crisis, the people who need treatment, the people who are finding themselves caught up in the criminal justice system because of addiction issues. So I think what it says is that the mayor understands that we're not going to arrest our way out of this, and that's not going to solve the problem, and that we need to make significant investments in ensuring that folks are able to kind of break the cycle that they find themselves caught up in. I think there's also just a lot of confusion about just police spending, and I don't think people realize that how much of police spending is actually out of the mayor and city council's hand because of state law. So basically, there's a state law that says that when the police in the city go to arbitration for a contract, an arbitration is a 3-panel group of people that decide what's fair and what's not fair. Whatever the arbitrators decide for the police contract, the city of Philadelphia is legally obligated to fund. So if an arbitrator says they get this much in money, they get this raises, the city of Philadelphia, under state law, has to provide that funding. So we heard a lot of this during when it was the defund the police movement and all of this stuff. But pun intended, mayor and city council are relatively handcuffed in the annual spending that they have to provide to the police and fire department because of this state law. So I think, the mayor's investment in the Forensic Science Center is a win-win. I think one of the biggest criticisms of police is that our clearance rates are absolutely terrible. And I think the mayor, again, is trying to invest in sort of long-term foundational things that will help improve public safety beyond throwing the book at people. It's like, let's make sure that we are clearing these crimes, that we're getting violent offenders off the street. And so to me, that investment just shows that public safety is still a top priority for her.
Lauren, what happened with school funding? That's apparently what led Councilmember Kendra Brooks of the Working Families Party to be this lone vote against the budget. Her and Councilmember O'Rourke from the Working Families Party as well, they really criticized the budget. They said it was decided behind closed doors. There was no additional money for reproductive health or mobile health teams that would help people experiencing mental health issues in a crisis, or the school district.
So there is actually additional funding going to the school district. The real property tax, part of it goes to the school district, part of it goes to the city operating budget, and that's the formula. And the mayor sent over a bill to council that would increase the amount of funding that goes to the school district based on the real property tax. So I think it's not true that the mayor has not increase the city's commitment to the school district. I think the school district's financial challenges right now, again, it's sort of like SEPTA. The state needs to be part of this solution. The city cannot simply afford to be the sole bailer out of either of these major institutions. And both of these institutions rely heavily on state funding as they should. So I do think the mayor has shown some renewed commitment both to SEPTA, both to the school district, but recognizes this is a state, this needs to be a state partnership. It can't just be the city of Philadelphia bowing out. In terms of the budgets negotiated behind closed doors, typically what happens is it's leadership that negotiates the budget with the administration. So Council President Kenyatta Johnson, Majority Leader Kathy Gilmore Richardson, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. And that's not unusual in any sort of legislative body. And Council members Brooks and O'Rourke are part of, they're in the minority party. So, you have public hearings and you have a direct relationship with the mayor, and you can make your priorities and initiatives heard. But the political reality is it's leadership negotiating with the mayor, and that's not uncommon.
One of the things that stood out to me, I was actually excited to see money being allocated for the extended day, extended year pilot that started with about 25 schools and is now being bumped up to 40 schools. And also there's been more investment to Community College of Philadelphia.
Yeah. When the mayor delivered her budget address this year, she made it very clear that she wants to be judged by what she does, not by what she says she will do. And so I think, more than probably any mayor in recent history, she knows what she promised she would do, and she checks her agenda against what she said she was going to get done. And so I think there's a lot of sort of personal accountability that she has when she's figuring out, what her spending priorities are. They are really centered on the promises she made when she ran for office. And frankly, as someone who works in politics, that's incredibly refreshing to see someone who not only makes these promises, but keeps track of whether they're following through or not. The reality is that we could probably have an unlimited source of revenue and still find ways to run out of money because there are so many critical needs in the city of Philadelphia. We are still one of the biggest poor cities in this country. We have high rates of poverty. Our educational attainment rates are really struggling. So there's so much need, and then there's so finite resources that, there's always going to be people upset in every budget that something didn't get funded because the needs are so great and the resources are so constrained.
So do you think the city is moving towards solving those problems with this budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think people think of public policy as kind of like a light switch that you can turn on and off and the problem gets solved. And the reality is it's more of like a studio mixing board with 1,000 different levers that you can slide up and slide down and move until you find the right combination of what works. And the reality is, if these problems were easy to solve, we would have solved them by now, right? So every problem we face is incredibly complex. And I think what you're seeing the mayor do is trying to invest in the things that are going to move the needle the fastest. So like housing is a major issue. If people don't have secure housing, if people are housing burdened, then it's going to be hard for them to do anything else if they don't have a roof over their head, right? She's focusing, I think, on the things that she think can move the needle the fastest. I think she's doing a good job, and I think she is, she's willing to try things to see if they work. And, I don't think the fear of failure is holding her back from trying new things.
We've got more on the budget after the break. Hey, CityCast Philly listeners. If you're thinking about getting a new car, now is the time, and Jeff D'Ambrosio is the place. With all the talk about tariffs and rising prices, Jeff is going all out this June with employee pricing, Jeff's exclusive discounts, and zero tariff impact on any vehicle in stock. You can save up to $15,000 on a brand new Jeep, Ram, or Dodge, and drive with monthly payments as low as $199. He's the #1 Jeep and Ram dealer in the Mid-Atlantic, with the biggest inventory and a customer service experience that's second to none. You'll be welcomed by a friendly team, and even Jeff himself stops by to offer honest advice. Whether it's a Jeep Grand Cherokee, Ram 1500, Dodge Charger EV, or a luxury Alfa Romeo, Jeff D has it all. Check it out at gojeffauto.com. Then head to Jeff D'Ambrosio Auto Group, the #1 destination in Downingtown. Nobody treats you better, nobody saves you more.
This episode is sponsored by Babbel. Have you ever picked a vacation spot based on where you won't need a phrase book? With Babbel, the language barrier no longer has to hold you back. You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based techniques, which quickly teach you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. Babbel has more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Ploth, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. What I really love about learning Spanish with Babbel is that it works with me where I am. The app and the website keep track of what I've learned. They help me review what I probably forgot from last time, and always is keeping me engaged with a new challenge based on actual conversations I might have in Spain or Mexico or Colombia, especially food conversations because I love food conversations. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to give you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/CityCast, spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
You mentioned earlier the housing plan from the mayor. How big of a deal is this home initiative that got passed?
I think it's a big deal in the sense that you hear a lot of mayors of cities and just not even cities anymore. I think the housing crisis is hitting everywhere, but I think you hear a lot of people talking about it. And, again, because it feels like such this huge problem, the solution needs to be big. The solution needs to be bold and aggressive. And so I think, this $800 million investment is a major play at trying to address this issue. And I think, again, housing is complicated as well, because you have things like labor costs are going through the roof, supplies are going through, all of these different factors that drive up the cost of housing are so complex and kind of like out of the city's control. So I think the mayor is sort of like, trying to take a really big and bold action to try to improve the situation, because without it, it's only going to get worse.
Lauren, you wrote in your weekly Broad and Market Substack that Quote, council waited until the last possible session to introduce the home bill, as we're talking about, for passage before its summer recess. Why is that?
Because I think it was a big ask. And I think there were conversations that were happening sort of behind the scenes there. You know, the $800 million, this is new debt that the city is taking on. And I think it shows that council is being sort of reflective in its responsibility of vetting the budget and things like that. I think they wanted some confidence in knowing, okay, what are we actually introducing here? Where is this money going? We're not just going to grant a blank check because it's for a good cause. We want to feel secure that the money is going to programs that are effective, that it's going to neighborhoods and people who need it the most. And so I think it was that sort of that waiting to the last session day was showing like, hey, we're gonna be looking at this. We're gonna be reflective on this.
Okay, I want to kind of figure out the relationships down in City Hall. Are Council President Kenyatta Johnson and the mayor as tight as they seem? And this was different from a historical perspective when it comes to the relationship between council presidents and mayors. I want to play a clip of Mayor Parker during the budget address.
I can remember that there were plenty of skeptics and naysayers out there predicting that we would fail. The mayor and the council president are from differing political factions, they said. They won't find common ground. They will fail. That was the buzz that people said when you became the president and I became the mayor. Philadelphia, I want to affirm that I cannot succeed without my partnership without Council President Kenyatta Johnson. And I am grateful and I want to publicly affirm it and thank him. And I'm glad we didn't listen to the skeptics, Mr. President.
Lauren, what's your take on the relationship between Mayor Parker and Council President Johnson?
I think the mayor sort of hit the nail on the head, is that a lot of her agenda depends on her working relationship with city council. And so I think to date, they've shown a very strong working relationship. I think Council President Johnson has been very, very supportive of the work that she has wanted to get accomplished. The mayor herself cannot introduce a piece of legislation. She can send it to council and ask them to introduce it, but at the end of the day, a council member has to step up and introduce it. And I think when you look at the volume of legislation she has sent over for introduction, almost as a rule, they have put it up for consideration and allowed it to go through the public legislative process. I think one of the big dynamics that I think makes this relationship slightly different than some past years is that they're both new in these roles together at the same time. So this isn't an incumbent council president that has to work with a new mayor or a new mayor working or an incumbent mayor working with a new council president. They both stepped up to these leadership roles at the same time. And I think that sort of allowed them to kind of forge a new path forward maybe than we've seen from some different and past relationship models.
I'm always curious about this. Like, does it help Mayor Parker that she was a former council member in all of these relationships that she has to have with city leadership?
It's so funny because I feel like everybody always thinks that when so we talk about the second floor and the fourth floor. The fourth floor is where council president sits. The second floor is where the mayor sits. And it's almost like after council members get elected mayor, and as they're making their way from the fourth floor to the second floor, like that memory erase machine from Men in Black, like hits them and they somehow forget what it was like being on council. And I think that really it helps to a certain extent, but like the dynamic is just wildly different when you're the mayor, when you're the chief executive versus being one of 17. And so I think it probably flavors and colors decisions. But what we've seen, whether it's been Mayor Parker, Mayor Kenny, Mayor Nutter, who all came from council, your job on the second floor is wildly different, and you treat it very independently than you did when you were working on the fourth floor.
There was also some criticism about the budget, and it's not preparing us enough for the federal cuts. Are we prepared for massive cuts in federal aid for Philly?
I mean, I think yes and no. I think you saw the administration put some money aside with the understanding that various programs that we are confident, especially things like environmental programming, things like that, that money might not be there. But on the other hand, like I don't think people are preparing for a doomsday scenario where we lose all of our federal funding. And again, I don't think this is unique to Philadelphia. I work with a lot of different jurisdictions, and I think everybody is taking sort of like reasonable steps to mitigate, but the idea that funding that was allocated by Congress through these programs would completely disappear. I don't think people are prepared for that, whether they're counting on the courts to step in or Congress to step in or someone to step in. I don't think the doomsday scenario is what people are expecting.
Any insight on how Mayor Parker feels about President Trump?
I mean, I could probably guess how she feels about President Trump, but she has been very diplomatic in her public expressions. I think she understands that this is a person who is relatively thin skinned when it comes to criticism. And I think she is sort of being mindful not to poke the bear or do anything that would jeopardize or impact Philadelphia negatively. I think she is sort of like, I obviously didn't vote for this person. I don't agree with this person's policies, but I'm going to kind of hold my nose because they are the president and I am the mayor, and I have to work within the reality with which I have been given. And I'm not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize or hurt the city of Philadelphia, even if it would feel really good to say my piece.
All right. Now that we have the city budget settled, all eyes go to Harrisburg. Because SEPTA funding is on the docket, what's going on with SEPTA's desperate efforts to find more than, 200 something million dollars from the state?
Yeah, the Harrisburg budget right now is caught up in like a variety of different issues. There's a lot of debate. It's a lot of people trying to figure out what leverage they have in getting certain things done. So I think you have an understanding that both the Democrats clearly understand that we need to fund SEPTA. I think on the Republican side, they, whether they agree with it or not, they understand that the SEPTA is at a crisis point, but they want to make sure that if they do fund SEPTA, that their constituents or that their politics are also kind of being rewarded in this tit for tat. So I think you're looking at rather than just we're talking about it as a SEPTA deal, I think you're looking at an infrastructure transportation package, one that will allow the urban centers to have transportation funding for their public transportation, and one that will allow the rural centers to have funding for rebuilding roads, rebuilding bridges, all those sorts of things. So I think we can come to an agreement on what the needs are. How do we fund those needs is where the next sort of battle comes. And so there's a couple of things that they're talking about being on the table. One is these skills games machines that you see at your corner bodega. You go in and there's now
gas stations. Yeah.
Gas stations. You're like, why is there a slot machine in here?
Yeah.
It's a skills game, totally different than a slot machine, right? And so I think there's this understanding. Okay, we need to regulate these things. We are leaving millions and millions of dollars of tax revenue on the table. How do we regulate them? How much are we charging? All of that stuff. So that's one I think okay, we can get to. Then there's the cannabis, everybody's favorite topic every budget year when there's a budget deficit. Cannabis. How do we, do we make recreational use legal? How much do we tax it? Do we run it through a state store model like we do liquor, or do we license it out? All of those conversations are happening. So I think at the end of the day, I think we are going to get over the finish line. I think Republicans will get their funding for their rural transportation and whatever else they feel like they need to be able to sign off on public transportation funding. I think I don't know if weed legalization will come this year, or it's going to come at some point, because at some point when we're one of 3 states that doesn't have legal weed, they're going to be kicking themselves about the loss of revenue. I think the skills game will come. It's just a matter of when does it come and is it in time to save SEPTA?
All right, political contributor Lauren Vitas. Folks can check out your Substack about local politics called Broad and Market. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our executive producer is Matt Katz. Our producer is Abby Fritz. Our Hey Philly newsletter editors are Siani Colon, Adrian Gonzalez, and Natalia Aldana. And our host is me, Chernay Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and Carl Christensen. Let us know what you think of this year's budget. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back Friday morning because we'll be observing Juneteenth. And we've got a show talking about issues around the country, including how Philly is preparing for 2026. Have a great holiday and be safe, y'all. Talk to you soon. Bye.